It was a night like any other in the quiet suburban neighborhood where Emily lived. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a soft glow over the neatly trimmed lawns and the rows of houses nestled against the backdrop of the darkened streets. But for Emily, this night held a sense of unease, a creeping dread that seemed to linger in the air like a whisper of warning. Ever since her breakup with Mark, her ex-boyfriend Emily had been on edge. Their relationship had ended on less than amicable terms, with Mark refusing to accept the breakup and bombarding her with incessant calls and messages, each one more desperate and unhinged than the last. At first, Emily had tried to reason with him, to explain that their relationship was over and that she needed space to move on with her life. But Mark was not one to take no for an answer, and his behavior only grew more erratic as the days turned into weeks. It started with late-night visits to her apartment, where he would stand outside her window for hours on end, watching her with a look of desperate longing in his eyes. Emily would find herself waking in the middle of the night to the sound of his voice, whispering her name through the darkness like a haunting refrain. At first, Emily had tried to ignore him, to pretend that his presence outside her window was nothing more than a figment of her imagination. But as the visits grew more frequent and more intrusive, she could no longer deny the truth. Mark was becoming increasingly obsessed with her, his behavior bordering on the verge of madness. With each passing night, Emily's fear grew stronger, until it felt as though she was living in a constant state of terror, never knowing when or where Mark would appear next. She began to avoid going out after dark, afraid of what lurked in the shadows beyond her doorstep. But no matter how hard she tried to escape him, Mark always found a way to worm his way back into her life, his presence a constant reminder of the nightmare from which she could not wake. And then, just when she thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. It was a particularly dark and stormy night, the rain pounding against the windows and the wind howling like a banshee in the night. Emily had just settled into bed, hoping to find solace in sleep after another long day of living in fear. But as she drifted off into uneasy slumber, she was jolted awake by the sound of breaking glass, followed by the creak of the front door opening slowly, as if pushed by an unseen hand. With a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins, Emily sat up in bed, her heart pounding in her chest as she strained to listen for any sign of intruders. But all she could hear was the sound of her own ragged breaths and the pounding of her heart in her ears. With trembling hands, Emily reached for her phone, her fingers fumbling with the screen as she dialed 911. But before she could speak, she heard it, the sound of footsteps echoing through the hallway, slow and deliberate, as if someone were stalking her through the darkness. With a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach, Emily realized Mark had found his way into her home, and he had no intention of leaving without her. With a sense of desperation driving her forward, Emily leaped out of bed and bolted for the door, her heart racing as she raced down the hallway toward the safety of the outside world. But as she reached for the doorknob, she felt a hand close around her wrist, pulling her back with a strength that took her breath away. With a cry of terror, Emily spun around to face her attacker, her eyes widening in horror as she came face to face with Mark, his eyes wild with madness and his lips twisted into a cruel smile. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she stared into Mark's eyes, a mixture of fear and disbelief coursing through her veins. She tried to pull away from his grasp, but his fingers dug into her skin like iron, leaving bruises in their wake. "Mark, please," Emily pleaded, her voice trembling with fear. "Let me go." But Mark only laughed, a chilling, mirthless sound that made Emily freeze in panic. His grip tightened even further, his nails biting into her flesh as he pulled her closer, his face contorted with a madness that made her blood run cold. "You can't leave me, Emily," Mark whispered, his breath hot against her ear. "You belong to me, forever." With a surge of panic, Emily fought against his hold, her mind racing as she searched for a way to escape. But Mark was relentless, his grip unyielding as he dragged her further into the darkness of the house. As they moved deeper into the shadows, Emily's mind raced with thoughts of escape. She tried to scream for help, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of the storm raging outside, the wind howling like a chorus of demons in the night. With each passing moment, Emily's fear grew stronger, until it felt as though she was suffocating under its weight. She knew she had to find a way out, to break free from Mark's grasp before it was too late. And then, just when she thought all hope was lost, she saw it. A glimmer of moonlight shining through a crack in the wall, illuminating a path to freedom. With a surge of adrenaline, Emily broke free from Mark's grasp, her heart pounding in her chest as she raced toward the light. But as she reached for the door, she felt a hand close around her ankle, pulling her back into the darkness. With a cry of desperation, Emily kicked out with all her strength, her foot connecting with Mark's face with a sickening thud. He released her with a curse, stumbling back into the shadows as Emily scrambled to her feet and bolted for the door. As she burst out into the night air, the storm raging around her like a tempest of fury, Emily felt a surge of relief wash over her. She knew she had escaped from Mark's clutches, at least for now. But as she glanced back at the house, her heart sank. Mark was still there, his silhouette looming in the doorway like a specter of death. And as their eyes met across the distance, Emily knew. One thing was certain. Her nightmare was far from over. And as Mark's sinister laughter echoed through the night, Emily realized the true horror of her ordeal had only just begun. After some days, Emily's parents reported her missing after not being able to get a hold of her. Emily is still missing to this day, and the police have canceled the search for both Emily and Mark. Story 2. As the soft glow of the computer screen illuminated the darkened room, Alex sat alone in his apartment, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he scrolled through his social media feed. It was a routine he had become all too familiar with, a nightly ritual of endless scrolling and mindless distraction. But tonight was different. Tonight, something caught Alex's eye. A message from an unfamiliar name. A name that sent a jolt of fear through his mind. It was from Sarah, his ex-girlfriend, the one he had tried so hard to forget. The breakup had been messy, filled with accusations and recriminations, each one tearing at the fragile fabric of their relationship until there was nothing left but bitterness and resentment. At first, Alex tried to ignore the message, to pretend that it was nothing more than a cruel prank. But as he read the words on the screen, he realized, with a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, that this was no joke. The message was filled with venomous words and vicious accusations, each one more hurtful than the last. Sarah accused him of betrayal, of lies and deceit, painting him as a monster in the eyes of their mutual friends. With a sense of disbelief washing over him, Alex tried to respond, to defend himself against Sarah's baseless accusations. But no matter how hard he tried, his words fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the flood of hatred and vitriol that poured forth from Sarah's keyboard. As the days turned into weeks, the situation only grew worse. Sarah's messages became more frequent, more aggressive, until it felt as though there was no escaping her relentless onslaught. And then, just when Alex thought things couldn't get any worse, they did. It started with whispers, a subtle shift in the way his friends looked at him, the way they avoided his gaze when he walked into a room. At first, Alex tried to brush it off, to convince himself that he was imagining things. But as the rumors spread like wildfire through their tight-knit circle, Alex realized, with a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, that Sarah's words had done irreparable damage to his reputation. One by one, his friends began to drift away, their trust in him shattered by the lies and deceit that Sarah had woven like a spider spinning its web. And though Alex tried to reach out to explain the truth behind Sarah's accusations, it was too late. The damage had been done and there was no going back. Alone and isolated, Alex sank deeper into despair, his world crumbling around him like a house of cards in a hurricane. He tried to drown out the pain with alcohol and distractions, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape the shadow of Sarah's betrayal. And then, just when he thought he had hit rock bottom, he received a message from Sarah, gloating over her victory, reveling in his misery like a predator toying with its prey. With a surge of rage and despair, Alex lashed out, his words dripping with venom as he cursed Sarah for the pain she had caused him. But as he hit send, a sense of dread washed over him, a feeling that he had just sealed his own fate. Days turned into weeks, and Alex found himself sinking deeper into a pit of despair with each passing moment. The once vibrant and lively man had become a shell of his former self, haunted by the ghost of Sarah's betrayal. As the whispers and rumors continued to swirl around him, Alex felt the weight of isolation crushing down upon him like a suffocating blanket. He watched helplessly as his friends drifted away, their faces morphing into masks of distrust and suspicion whenever he tried to approach them. But amidst the darkness, there was one beacon of light: Emma. She was a childhood friend who had always stood by Alex's side, her unwavering loyalty a source of comfort in his darkest hours. Despite the rumors and accusations, Emma refused to believe the lies that Sarah had spread, standing firm in her support for Alex. Together they would spend long hours talking into the night, their conversations a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. Emma listened as Alex poured out his heart, his words a torrent of pain and anguish as he struggled to make sense of the chaos that had engulfed his life. But despite her best efforts, Emma could see that Alex was slipping further and further into despair with each passing day. She watched helplessly as his once bright eyes grew dull with sadness, his laughter replaced by a hollow echo of what it used to be. Determined to help her friend break free from the grip of Sarah's manipulation, Emma set out to uncover the truth behind the rumors that had torn their friendship circle apart. She spent long hours combing through social media posts and messages, searching for any hint of the truth buried beneath the mountain of lies. And then, one fateful night, she found it. A message from Sarah to one of Alex's former friends, gloating over her success in turning them against him. With a sense of vindication burning in her chest, Emma presented the evidence to Alex, her eyes shining with determination as she urged him to fight back against the lies. With newfound resolve, Alex set out to reclaim his life, determined to confront Sarah and put an end to her reign of terror once and for all. He confronted her with the evidence of her deceit, his voice steady as he demanded an explanation for her actions. But Sarah's response was chilling, a cold, heartless laugh. She admitted to spreading the rumors, reveling in the pain and suffering she had caused him like a twisted puppeteer pulling the strings of her victim. With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, Alex realized Sarah was not the girl he had once loved. She was a monster, a manipulative force of darkness that had torn apart his life with a cruelty that knew no bounds. Alex wrote in his diary that he could not handle the terror anymore. He had to find a way out of this world. These were the last words from Alex before he was found cold and lifeless out in the woods. Story 3. In the small town of Willow Creek, nestled among the rolling hills and lush forests of the countryside, lived a young couple named Lily and Jake. They had been together since high school, their love blossoming like a wildflower in the warmth of summer. But as the years passed and the novelty of young love began to fade, cracks started to appear in their relationship. Jake's jealousy and possessiveness grew stronger with each passing day, his insecurities bubbling to the surface like a dormant volcano waiting to erupt. Lily tried to ignore the warning signs to convince herself that Jake's behavior was just a phase, a temporary lapse in judgment brought on by the stress of daily life. But deep down, she knew the truth. Jake's love had become suffocating, his grip on her heart growing tighter with each passing moment. And then one fateful day, Lily made the decision that would change their lives forever. She broke up with Jake. At first, Jake seemed to take the news in stride, his expression unreadable as he listened to Lily's words. But as she turned to leave, a flash of anger crossed his face, his eyes darkening with a fury that made her blood turn cold. For weeks after the breakup, Jake's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He bombarded Lily with incessant calls and messages, each one more desperate and unhinged than the last. He showed up unannounced at her workplace, his eyes wild with desperation as he begged her to take him back. But Lily stood firm, her resolve unwavering as she refused to give in to Jake's demands. She knew that their relationship had become toxic, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode, and she was determined to break free from its suffocating grasp. And then one night as Lily lay alone in her bed, she heard it. The sound of breaking glass, followed by the creak of the front door opening slowly, as if pushed by an unseen hand. With a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins, Lily sat up in bed, her heart pounding in her chest as she strained to listen for any sign of intruders. But all she could hear was the sound of her own ragged breaths and the pounding of her heart in her ears. With trembling hands, Lily reached for her phone, her fingers fumbling with the screen as she dialed 911. But before she could speak, she heard it. The sound of footsteps echoing through the darkness, slow and deliberate, as if someone were stalking her through the shadows. With a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach, Lily realized Jake had found his way into her home, and he had no intention of leaving without her. With a sense of panic driving her forward, Lily leapt out of bed and bolted for the door, her heart racing as she raced down the hallway toward the safety of the outside world. But as she reached for the doorknob, she felt a hand close around her wrist, pulling her back with a strength that took her breath away. With a cry of terror, Lily spun around to face her attacker, her eyes widening in horror as she came face to face with Jake, his eyes wild with madness, and his lips twisted into a cruel smile. And as the darkness closed in around her, Lily knew one thing was certain. Her nightmare was far from over, and as Jake's grip tightened around her wrist, pulling her further into the depths of his madness, Lily realized the true horror of her ordeal had only just begun. Days turned into weeks, and Lily found herself living in a constant state of fear and paranoia, never knowing when or where Jake would strike next. Everywhere she went, she felt his presence lurking in the shadows, his eyes watching her with a sinister intensity that sent chills down her spine. Despite her best efforts to distance herself from him, Jake seemed to be everywhere, waiting outside her workplace, lingering near her favorite coffee shop, even showing up uninvited at her friends' gatherings. It was as if he had become a ghost, haunting her every waking moment with his relentless pursuit. Lily's friends urged her to go to the police, to seek a restraining order against Jake and put an end to his harassment once and for all. But Lily hesitated, paralyzed by a fear of what Jake might do if she took such drastic measures. And then, one night as Lily lay alone in her apartment, she heard a noise, a soft scratching sound coming from the other side of the door. With a sense of dread creeping over her, Lily crept out of bed and tiptoed toward the door, her heart pounding in her chest as she pressed her ear against the wood. At first, all she could hear was the sound of her own breathing, the silence of the night broken only by the faint hum of the streetlights outside. But then, just as she was about to turn away, she heard it again, the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching from the hallway. With a surge of panic, Lily backed away from the door, her mind racing as she searched for a way to escape. But before she could make a move, the door burst open with a deafening crash, and Jake stepped into the room, his eyes wild with madness and his lips twisted into a sinister grin. With nowhere to run and no one to turn to, Lily felt a sense of despair wash over her as Jake advanced toward her, his footsteps echoing through the room like the tolling of a funeral bell. She knew that she was trapped, at the mercy of a man whose love had turned to madness, and she feared what he might do to her in his relentless pursuit of revenge. And then, just as Jake reached out to grab her, Lily's phone rang, breaking the silence of the room with its shrill ringtone. With a surge of hope, Lily grabbed the phone and dialed 911, her voice trembling as she pleaded for help. Seconds felt like an eternity as Lily waited for the police to arrive, her heart pounding in her chest as she listened to the sound of Jake's heavy breathing growing closer and closer. But just as she was about to lose hope, she heard the sound of sirens wailing in the distance, growing louder with each passing moment. With a sense of relief washing over her, Lily backed away from Jake, her eyes never leaving his as she waited for the police to burst through the door and rescue her from the nightmare that had consumed her life. And then, just as Jake lunged toward her, the door burst open and a team of officers stormed into the room, their guns drawn and their faces grim with determination. With a cry of triumph, Lily collapsed into their arms, tears streaming down her face as she realized one thing was certain: she was safe. And as Jake was dragged away in handcuffs, his eyes burning with hatred and rage, Lily realized the true horror of her ordeal had finally come to an end.